Everybody, we've got another Savage Gentleman podcast here with a returning guest, Ryan Palmer. And you may remember him as the adventure tour guide. That was kind of his main profession, although he's a man of many talents. He's got a lot of stuff going on. And now he is in the realm, and I'm probably going to screw this up, and you may need to explain it because it's fairly complex. But he's dealing in the realm of crisis management, getting his PhD. So he's going for his doctorate, crisis management and more particular complex systems. Is that a good?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, it's to be more specific about it. We got a little bit of time. I'll kind of explain so it makes a little bit more sense. I did for a long time was doing what was called Phoenix Tourism, and that's the kind of pointy end of the spear for tourism. Phoenix referring to the bird that comes up at it, is
mythical beast.
Yeah, the mythical bird, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Phoenix tourism occurs post conflicts, post disasters, that sort of thing. It's the rebuilding of the industry, opening
rising from the
and
ashes.
That sort of thing.
Okay.
Rising from the ashes. So back in kind of the mid 90s, I found myself in Central America and South America later, in the kind of later 90s, opening up those areas for the very, very first tourists that were going in there after 40 years of civil war in that area. It was certainly not a safe environment. There was very, very little infrastructure whatsoever. And so I found myself doing a lot of very interesting things at that time to make that happen, to actually bring that about. And and now those areas have developed into some really beautiful places for Joe Average to go do their tourism. You don't have to be some adventure.
I'm guessing at the time you stepped in, no one would have dreamt of going into those places without probably a fairly well-armed militia, just for fear of safety and other.
In some areas, yeah. In some areas, for sure. And it was not a safe period. The Civil War in Central America officially ended in 96. We were in there in 95. And as most people who've been involved with any sort of global security initiatives, peacekeeping initiatives will know that it's the post ceasefire period that can very, very quickly become the least stable.
Yeah.
There's a readjustment period where people who've been fighting and killing each other for who knows how long are trying to be reintegrated into society, and a society that doesn't have much left of infrastructure to receive them into, right?
Yeah.
And
so a great example. What we just saw in Afghanistan would probably be a pretty good.
Precisely. Oh, yeah. That's going to be exactly the same sort of environment that we were dealing with at that time. But all these adventure tour companies thought, hey, look, Guatemala, they're no longer in the Civil War. That's extremely reductive to say they're no longer in a civil war. They're not. But when people have been in that environment for technically.
Yeah.
Let's go and visit Tikal. Let's go and visit, Antigua. Let's go and, see these places that they knew were there, that were beautiful and historical and very much the sort of thing that a tourist would want to see. Now, so I got into that in kind of a roundabout way that I don't need to get into. We might get into it later, but really what I learned in that was that I had to be aware of far more than just the ability to get a person from one point to another and back. And so very quickly, I started making connections with people with the Foreign Service, obviously different military organizations that were operating in those areas, and found that that this notion of specialization really limits a person's scope within which they can make decisions and operate and execute those decisions. And so, I was a tradesman originally. I was actually an oil field sack diver, which kind of was the roundabout route for me ending up in these parts of the world. It's a long story. We don't need to get into it right now. But I recognized that I wanted to get into being able to make decisions at a more executive type level. And so that brought me to university. I studied business and a few other things. And and picked up a few languages while I was doing that. And then started, running my own businesses and that sort of thing, and recognizing that the specialization of business didn't provide me the ability to make the decisions that I needed to make. I needed to understand the way the systems worked, be able to understand why is there a, what is Plan Colombia? That's the kind of pointy end of the spear for the war on drugs.
Okay.
And how does it affect, Colombians? How does it affect Americans? How does it affect Americans' allies? What is it that's really going on in those environments that are far more than just trying to stop drugs? You stop drugs, but what does that mean all the way down the line?
Yeah.
For example, you start actively using force to prevent people from making a lot of money, then you're going to get force in return, and equal force in return. So there's far more going on than just one scope. So I actually stumbled across the notion of an interdisciplinary field of studies where you pick the elements with the help of academic direction to fill in a degree that will actually get you to understand and work in the fields that you want to.
So you just made the whole thing up.
Basically, yeah. That's absolutely what it is.
So you're like, I'm going to be a doctor in whatever the hell I want to be.
Yeah. So you go in and
man.
Yeah, it
that's
is.
What I need.
It is. It's what I think most people need, because the idea is the idea that was frustrating to me is I'd be dealing with someone who was really good in public policy, but had no concept in how to deal with a crisis.
Interesting. And that's a bad combination.
It's a really bad combination, but these people are like super eggheads in that one area, but they have no scope of understanding outside of that, and which limits their ability to even interact with the professionals who work in those fields.
And I think we see that, right? And this is a pretty good segue into the whole idea or the concept that I wanted to talk with you, because we've had quite a few conversations back and forth about this shit show that is going on that has been the last, year, 2 years now. And we have been in a state of crisis for sure. I mean, a crisis like
far more than just the pandemic situation.
Yes,
it's a crisis of multiple layers of the onion.
It's a tiramisu of crisis here.
A tiramisu. Yeah. Tiramisu. I like it.
And so that, led us down some interesting rabbit holes. And I think we'll probably touch on those. But what I was unaware of, other than like, hey, this is really messed up. Like, what is happening here is just, it's off. There's something off about it. I don't know what, and I don't know why, but I have enough intuition. And I think that I can understand logic and critical thinking well enough to say that like something is amiss. And you highlighted, it's like, well, there is a very formulaic, well-defined way to handle crisis that has been established over decades, maybe even longer of research. And everything that we have seen over the past, however long this has been transpiring, is the polar opposite of that. And I thought, wow, that's really eye-opening. I didn't know that existed, but that, sheds an interesting light on what we've all been experiencing, because it has been a crisis, and it makes one wonder, well, why would you not follow the formula to manage said crisis? And I think one of the answers to that you already gave us is it's a very complex system. And the person who's really good at public policy is not necessarily good at crisis management, which I think we can probably all agree upon. I mean, maybe there are some people that are really super happy with how things have been handled so far. In both, I mean, just taking America, for example, maybe you really like the way the prior guy was running things, and you also really like the way that, the current guy is doing it, and you're just super happy with things.
Yeah. And that's fair enough.
I guess that's possible.
We can even discuss why that might be. There's clear academic principles about why somebody you look at and think this person is a otherwise intelligent person, but what they believe sounds really stupid to me, or the other end of the spectrum might be are they blind to what's going on?
Yeah.
And there are academic theories that support very cohesively and coherently as well why it is that somebody that you might see something. You and I've had lots of conversations. I mean, how long have we known each other? 3 or 4 years?
At least, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. The last podcast you were on with us was like maybe 20 something, and so that's been quite a while.
Yeah, it's been a bit. I mean, I was even involved with the moderation of your website, of your Facebook page for a little while, before things really hit the fan.
Got crazy, yeah.
It just got crazy, and but yeah, we've had a lot of conversations, and one of the things that I love that doesn't seem to exist in society anymore is we in society we kind of have this idea that in order to if we understand somebody, we will therefore agree with them. That is, in my opinion, within this concept that I'm going to talk to you about. It's called bounded rationality.
Sorry, say that.
Within my opinion, bounded rationality.
Bounded. Okay, got it.
Bounded rationality, like bounds of rationality. In my opinion, I absolutely have no problem. And for that matter, I think it's an extremely healthy position to be in, to be able to understand somebody's position that you are in complete disagreement with, but you can understand it.
I do it all the time. My 3-year-old wants to eat candy for breakfast. I understand where he's coming from perfectly, but I don't agree with it.
It's a pretty basic principle. It's a pretty basic principle. Most things that people do are understandable if you can back away from your own bounded rationality. And bounded rationality, basically, simply put, is that people will make good decisions. Always. Every single individual that you ever meet, even the moron, is making good decisions in their own mind. And the reason why they believe this is because bounded rationality says that your decisions are made according to the scope of your understanding, your knowledge, your cultural background, your upbringing, what information you have available to you, what reasoning skills you have picked up throughout life to get you to be able to assimilate that information. Right. And so, as though you or I might look at somebody and go, "What the are they doing? That's a stupid. That's a shitty decision."
Yeah,
I'm assuming your audience doesn't mind short words.
You can say whatever you want to say, buddy.
Okay, so you and I would look at it and go, "That's pretty fucked up. What's going on?"
Right.
But when
and we do
all the time, I even look at some of the decisions I make. 5 minutes since I've made it, go, "What the fuck was I thinking?" And all you need to do is add one little bit of information, one little bit of context, one piece of something to the bounds of your rationality. And all of a sudden your decision-making process or your ideas or your interpretations of things change completely.
And it sounds so simple when you say it like that, that you would think anyone would be able to grasp that concept and apply it. I think the trouble lies that most of us, and rarely can we do it all the time. We may have brief moments where we can get outside of our own head and maybe see things from a different perspective. But for the most part, we are so entrenched in our own bounded rationality that we can't extend beyond that to try and appreciate or understand someone else's. And I think that's the issue, where it's like, I see this all the time, and lucky for you, you're not really on social media anymore. And fortunately, I still have to be a part of it. And I see this with Facebook arguments and stuff all the time, where people will get on and they'll say whatever. And it's really easy to have that knee-jerk reaction from your own perspective. How dare you say this thing? But then when I look at this person and I'm like, oh, well, no wonder he's saying that. He must have a very tiny penis. Of course he's going to act this
Of course, that's the only reason why anybody would act differently to me is because they're compensating. It's just Freudian penis envy. That's why anybody would ever disagree with me.
This is why you would make that comment, because you have
talking about Dr. Douchebag, right?
The only reason you would get onto our Facebook page and just start unsolicited talking shit is because, you have a micro penis, and that, that's a thing. Yeah. I'm sure, guys, and that's okay. You can live your life that way. But a lot of dudes, I'm going to get so much shit like, oh, so what? You hate guys with little dicks? What an asshole! I thought this show was for for everybody.
Yes, I do.
and I'm using that as an analogy. I think whatever size you're packing is fine. I think that's
whatever size you're packing. I don't actually care to know, frankly.
I think God made you that way for a purpose, and that is perfectly fine. And I accept you for who you are.
And it might be to compensate for it through Facebook trolling your whole life long. That was the purpose for which you were placed on this planet.
Maybe that's right. Your lot in life.
Right.
And really, I'm using that as a stand-in for just some level of insecurity or some other behavioral pattern that it's actually pretty easy to pick up on why people do the things that they do. It usually stems from, a fairly reliable experience, right? You can look at people's behavior and be like, oh yeah, like you probably had, this is what's going on just based on the way that you're acting.
It can be, but one of the things that I found, and I don't like the word "but" because it kind of negates everything that you said before it.
Okay.
I agree with what you're saying. Yet, for me, I recognize that often what I'll do is I'll say, well, that person's that way because of this. Mm-hmm. But when I back away from it, I go, no, that's not necessarily true. I would be that way because of this.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily mean that dude is that way because of the way that.
No, I think that's fair.
Me, right?
We're always subject. Well, we don't have a choice but to make assumptions because we can't know the truth.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm going to, based off of my own experience, based off of my own probable projection to some degree, because I can't escape that either. And my own experiences with other people and what I've studied and learned and understood, then yeah, I'm going to make my best guess and try and solve that equation. But it certainly doesn't mean that I have it 100% correct. I could be way off the mark. And when you're talking about, we were discussing this a little bit before, this idea of like, A plus B equals C, right? Or whatever we think the formula is. Man, very rarely is it that simplistic. There's so many variables and levers, as you said, that can be pulled, and the outcomes are so beyond our comprehension that trying to 100% reliably say, okay, every guy who leaves asshole remark on one of our Facebook ads has a small dick. And say with 100% certainty, that would be insane. I can't make that.
That's right. It's kind of like this notion. We were talking about this before the podcast started. I mentioned that there's a lot going on right now in the role that I have that is pretty heady. It's really it's very high stress, and it's very it's got my two remaining brain cells. Overheating is what basically is happening.
Wait, so you're telling me that dealing in crisis all day, every day, and studying it and delving into it is somewhat stressful and difficult?
Absolutely not. It's easy. Weird. I love it. I may as well be playing. I may as well be. Yeah, it's shocking. But the thing that I was saying to you before is that when I get that way, one of my I've noticed that one of my fallbacks is I kind of get this I know everything Dr. Douchebag tone, that because I'm used to people coming to me to solve these problems. And so when somebody comes to me just to have a conversation, you get, if you're working 10, 12 hours a day doing that, your initial response is to do, and I'm a dude, and dudes generally want to solve problems anyhow, right? So you throw those two things together, and I turn into Dr. Douchebag. And if I was to look at somebody else as being a douche, I'd think, well, obviously he's got a really a really demanding job right now and it's stressful at work, and but he might just be a douche, or he might be really insecure, or he may be really insecure and he's covering for something.
Yeah.
But for me to jump at it and go, well, he's got my problem. No, my problem might be different.
Yeah. Well, again, we do.
But then that goes right back to this whole notion of we all think we're special too. So,
Yeah, I mean, we can. There's a lot to unpack with that, but I think you're totally right in this idea of we do want to, as guys. I do it all the time. A knee-jerk reaction is, oh, hey, yeah, I've got you say something to me that maybe you're asking for help, maybe you're not, maybe you're just venting, maybe you're just making a statement, and it's really hard if I have some inkling of a solution not to just deliver that to you. Right. And
yeah.
do it all the time. And I've tried to be a bit more self-aware, thanks in large part to my wife, where she's like, hey, man, I didn't need you to give me a dissertation on this thing. I was just telling you about my day. I was like, oh, shit. I was kind of douchey. I was kind of a douchebag. Yeah, my bad. Oops.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so it's one of those things that when you look at what's going on in the world right now, you seem to see this kind of bifurcation happening, polarization between people who look at it and go, this is being done really well, but you see that in politics as well all the time, right? You see, in the U.S. Context, you see a bifurcation of people who loved Trump and people who loved Obama. And the ones that seemed to love Trump hated Obama, and the ones that loved Obama seemed to hate Trump. And it's a very easy place to find a bifurcation happening. The U.S. is a good example. It's got this kind of, it turned into a de facto two-party political system.
Yep.
I don't believe, from my understanding of the founding documents, that was anywhere near the intent to create two left and right kind of.
No, absolutely not. I mean,
but that's how it's kind of gone, right?
I'm trying to think, and I can't recall which president. Someone who's smarter and has a better understanding of history is probably screaming at their screen right now. But one of the presidents or founding fathers explicitly stated, not to go that route, and was like, hey, this is like the worst thing that we could do is make this a binary either or, type deal. Like, we need to have a few more options on the table because it's going to get real bad real fast. And, 200 something years later, here we are. It's kind of ugly. I'm not saying we need to abandon the ship, but it's not.
No. And I mean, you look around and I think it's very easy for people in whatever nation that they're in to look at the problems that are there and think that those problems are insurmountable. The U.S. is a very large nation, and I'm not talking just geographically. As far as population is concerned, it is. I mean, it doesn't compare to China and India.
Sure.
But when you look at the actual scale of things, it's up there. There's a lot of people to deal with. That's and fundamentally, if we look at the U.S. system, which that I was born Canadian, but have spent most of my life in Latin America, Venezuela being one of the primary countries, Cuba as well, Colombia, and then of course Central America for those later.
So you've seen how well communism works firsthand.
Oh, well, that's a different topic altogether, and we can go into that one.
Sorry,
but one of the things that I think is fascinating is that most people aren't aware, even Americans. A lot of Americans are not aware of this, but since 1776, pretty much every republic that is formed thereafter has based their republic on some semblance of what the U.S. system was, right? And is. Has created some semblance or borrowed some aspects of the founding documents. And so for people to look at the U.S. and think that the U.S. is in a nosedive, I think it's in a time of crisis, but the U.S. has been in crisis before, been in crisis several times before. And that has changed things, but the U.S. is still there. And I think we should expect to see the U.S. to be able to figure this out, provided that people can step away from this need to agree with everybody before you understand them, rather than understand them and be fine with disagreeing with them, but seek to understand, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we're in a position right now with social media particularly, which is, incidentally, you mentioned it earlier. When I started my program, I had the director of the program say something that I thought was kind of remarkable. She said, as academics, your job is to seek every possible way to drink as far upstream from the herd as possible, and to look for every possible way to avoid drifting down that stream. And she said, and I want to make it very clear that the furthest point on that stream for gathering information is social media.
Yeah, that is at the very bottom. You were at very bottom. You're in the Delta. You may as well be out in the middle of the ocean.
Every Tom, Dick, and Harry, their dog, the deers, the cows, the pigs, and everything is shat in that water before you get to that point in the stream. Yes. And it's surprisingly difficult to stay away from floating down that information stream, because as you float down the stream, it's designed to be more accessible and easy to absorb.
And furthermore, it's designed to be as inflammatory. Like, the stuff that it's making its way to you has risen to the top because it's now been preferentially treated, because the algorithm and the system is built in a way to prioritize those because it gets people going, right? And so I don't think people realize that, like, one, you're way down the stream, everything's shat in it, so the water is pretty.
That's the correct verb tense for that, right? I think that's that's the correct verb tense.
They have shite.
Shitted, shite.
I like shat.
Shat works. Shitted, shited.
That sounds really. I don't know. I think shat is.
It sounds like I should have a little handlebar mush.
You should. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that's just coming across your feed has been put there, and social media has outright. I mean, it's been documented that yes, the system is designed to prioritize those because that's what gets more people watching, and it is a system that feeds off of attention, and it's going to do whatever it can to get more and more attention. And it's somewhat hypocritical, and I guess maybe not hypocrisy, but at least irony, that this is also a platform that we are using to distribute this information that we're getting right now. Like, I mean, this is going to go out up on YouTube. It's going to go on Facebook and Instagram and all these other things. And, it is going to get mixed in the same current with all the other feces particles and everything else that's coming down.
I mean, that's an unavoidable evil in the sense that social media is a tool, right? It's a tool to get information out very quickly to a wide array of people, as wide array of people, as wide away. I've turned into Elmer Fudd there. Look at that. As wide array as possible of people, and therefore, like every tool. I mean, we could talk about guns, for example, right? That's a tool.
You can't talk about guns. You're in Canada. Stop. You're about to get arrested.
That's true. They're coming.
They're coming.
The lights go out. That's what happened. That's right. They're coming right now.
I know.
Well, so if you see some hands kind of come over and grab me off the screen, you know what's happening. But yeah, so you talk about guns, right? And guns certainly, absolutely can have been involved with some pretty horrendous things that have happened. Yet to say that they're not a valuable tool in, say, a police officer's hand or any sort of law enforcement, be it domestic or foreign.
Or a trained individual who's defending themselves, or someone who's going to try and put food on their table instead of, it's super useful. I can tell you firsthand, trying to kill stuff with a traditional bow and arrow, it's real freaking hard, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was in Venezuela, we used to harvest guinea fowl all the time with rocks, but I'll tell you.
In a sling? Like
No,
old
just a
school
rock.
David sling?
Like
Oh, you just throw it.
just a rock. Yeah.
Dang.
Because they're stupid dumb birds. They're stupid, and they all flock together. They kind of crouch together, and so all you got to do is throw it in a general direction, and you're going to get one. And they're really tasty. They taste a lot like grouse or pheasant.
Nice.
But the issue is when you pick up a 410, you're not going to just get one. Right?
You get a lot.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and so it's a tool, right? And so like all tools, they can be used to benefit, but they can also be used as a force magnifier to do negative things as well. And social media is certainly one of them. Problem is that when you're a working professional and working towards an academic degree, the amount of time that there is for you to filter through the garbage and find the good stuff just really isn't there. And so and most of this information comes out of the primary sources to begin with. And if you have access as an academic to a primary source material, which for someone who's not in academia, getting your hands on these documents costs money. You have to rent them. And so if you have the opportunity to go straight to the source of where this information is coming, it's heady, it's hard to read. It takes a while to even understand where to find the information in the sorts of academic documents. Then it is to just let it trickle down and pick out the little memes here and there that may not be true. They may also be misinterpretations of what is true.
Yeah.
Or, you know.
Well, and what you get along with that is every step of the way, there's going to be included a bit more bias and a bit more bias and a bit more bias. And that's not to be like conspiratorial and say, oh, here's what they're trying to do. That is, I mean, there is going to be bias to some degree in the very first white paper that comes out. It's absolutely inescapable. It doesn't matter. You have to, and you know, so even the white paper, even the science still has to be taken with some grain of salt to some degree. Now, we can't just disregard everything that comes out because it came from the, you know, hand to the mouth of a human, right?
Well, that's one of the reasons. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. Go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I'm getting really excited about what you're talking about.
Oh, good.
This is good. This is good. So he takes his coffee. Is that coffee you're drinking right now? He takes his coffee slower because he knows that I'm excited to hear what he's got to say, and he's this is nice. I like it.
I'm just gonna hold you there for a second.
That's right. Just hold me there. That's impressive. That's impressive. That, huh? I think that's a bit of a savage gentleman like alloy skill that you just had there. That was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, I like that. Good. I'm glad most people wouldn't notice that subtle.
Yeah, that was cool, man.
I mean, all kidding aside, I find for myself, and you'll hear it in my voice when I get really fired up, I go really, really fast. And then I just need to like give myself that pause and that breath because it's just going to spiral into a freaking Tasmanian devil of word salad that no one is going to be able to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
So that was a lot for me as it was for you. But this idea of, you know, bias coming down the line, and it's going to happen. And we just have to accept that and you know, factor that into our calculations. And like what I was saying before is not just, well, okay, whoever wrote this had bias, so all of this data is now null and void. It's like, well, no, that's still useful data, but it's not necessarily the end all be all. This is the hard part that I think people don't quite understand about science, is that as soon as it gets printed and put out, it's a done deal. Well, here's what the studies found. So
yeah, and that's a problem that we're living in right now. The notion that a science can be settled is ridiculous, because we thought we understood Newtonian physics, right? That a certain thing, it's either a solid, liquid, or a gas. That mass is energy, and that energy can either be created or destroyed. We believe that for a long, long time as being a definitive science. We now know through string theory and quantum physics and so forth that that Newtonian physics doesn't always apply.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had put ourselves in a position where we refused to continue in that debate of proving these theories, I mean, they don't really understand what causes gravity. I mean, they understand that if an object is large, it's going to have more gravity, but they don't really understand what it is,
mm-hmm.
right? And that is it's actually one of the weakest forces, but it's also the one that governs our lives more than any other force does. And yet we really don't understand how it functions fully. And so this notion of the science is settled. And I know that I might be ruffling some feathers because that's a common phrase that is attributed to climate change, right?
Sure.
Science is settled.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that as soon as that attitude becomes prevalent, permeating throughout any discipline, progress ceases. Understanding ceases to grow. If I decide I know who you are and I understand how you work, we've got a problem. One of the things that's known, science, the whole scientific process involves questioning,
mm-hmm.
doubting, reviewing. And every time that happens, new information can be spawned, new insights can be birthed, new ideas can be created. And so if I was to look at you and say, look, I've known you for 5 years, 4 years, 6 years, I don't know. Feels like I've known you forever, but
mm-hmm.
so I understand Josh Tyler. I got it. At that moment, the relationship that you have with that individual who you just put into that pigeonhole, this is that person,
mm-hmm.
not only ceases to develop for you, but you can also, when they're in your presence or within your influence, you can negatively influence their development as well, right? Mm. That's the problem of pigeonholing friends and family members.
Yep.
And that's precisely what happens when you use that phrase, the science is settled, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you got to say that it's all bunk to challenge it. You just say, okay, I don't understand this aspect of it. Let's poke into this a little bit more,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's what I find really fascinating about complex systems theory, is that everything that is around us is part of one big system. And in order for us to understand how one aspect of that system affects another seemingly unrelated part of that system, you have to start looking at that system and its different stocks and its flows and what it's designed to create, or at least what you think it's designed to create. Is it producing that? Why not? And then you can start looking at the different means, they're called systems levers, where you can control and change how those stocks and flows are, so you can, in the end, manipulate what's being pumped out of that system.
Yeah.
Right?
I think something that's really important, and this may ruffle your feathers a little bit because this is kind of your thing, but to
ruffle them away, man. I love that.
Well,
that's awesome.
The whole notion. I mean,
that sounded like a come on, man. Ruffle my feathers,
don't threaten me with a good time. That's right. No, I guess maybe I should preface it. This is not to take your whole life's work and diminish it or negate it by anything. The notion of trying to even understand complex systems in general, to me, implies a lot of hubris in us as humans, in our feeble understanding of anything. The fact that we can try and make heads or tails of anything at all is, it's kind of funny. I mean, yes, we try and we do our best, and I think we come to some decent conclusions, given that we're just, a bunch of hairless murder apes. But
what'd you say? Hairless murder ape? Hairless murder apes?
Yeah. I mean, kind of. If you look at the human species, like, man, we're, we are both capable of some of the most amazing feats and some of the absolute most despicable things as well. But be that as it may, thinking that we can, like, oh yeah, man, I can look at, the way that the sun and the moon interact with the planet and the forces of gravity, and I can decide and I can determine exactly how this weather pattern is going to affect this crop, which is then going to affect this share of the market and these people's bottom line for their business, and therefore understand the propensity to violence and crime in this impoverished area. Because, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, sure thing, guy. Good luck with that.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
And and I'm
go for it, Poindexter. You're gonna figure that one out. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see that chalkboard.
So, yeah, and the reality is that's a really good statement. And the fact is, you're right. You're absolutely right. In order for someone like me or the people who I learn from and the people who they learn from in turn to say that, okay, we're going to get to a point where we understand these systems, particularly right now, technology is hugely limiting on our ability to really crunch the data that would allow us to understand the system. We were talking earlier about systems levers. Systems levers are where you can get in and manipulate those systems, right? One of the things that's commonly known within those who study complex systems or complex systems theory is that those levers are almost invariably counterintuitive. You flip them one way, thinking that the outcome is going to go in the way that you plan it. The outcome actually goes the complete opposite way. And that's almost a given.
Yeah.
And the problem is that you don't know. It's kind of that, okay, I flip it this way. Oh, but counterintuitively, it's going to give me this. Oh, so I should flip it now, but now counterintuitively, it's actually, so it's kind of that, and that's, we're talking about interest rates, right? Mm-hmm. Interest rates is a lever within the housing market and the economy in general. But just one of the things about complex systems theory is that you got to be able to recognize that, like you said, we are just white bald murder apes, or maybe not. Sorry, we're just, you and I were white bald murder apes, right? So for us, really, some balder than others. That's right. And it's particularly this part. This is weird, man. Anyhow, but so for us to be able to go and say, all right, well, we understand this to the extent that we can control it. Well, we've shown time and time again that we're not capable of controlling it. 2008 was an example of that. The Great Depression was another example of that. I mean, we look at so many examples in history that we can draw from and say we don't understand these complex systems. Does that mean that we shy away from trying to understand them? I think the practitioner to walk into a gym and see people see advanced guys rolling, you would say, no, no point. There's no point, right? But after years, and you get your first stripe or, that sort of stuff, and you start to realize that the more you learn, the less you actually know. And I saw a really interesting chart a little while ago, and it was just an XY graph, and it says, and it said age, and what it is how much. So the bottom one was age, how much you know, and the other one was how much you think you know, right? And that's the reality.
Where did it show the intersection? What is the intersection of those two curves? It was just
a quick scrawling on a whiteboard. Oh, somebody was trying to accept an idea.
What's the age where they
I don't know.
It should be, probably 30 or 40, hopefully, for most.
Maybe. I don't know. I think. Yeah, maybe I don't know, but that concept is so very true. And for somebody to come away with, their academic credentials and say, well, I now understand complex systems theory. That's like telling a black belt in BJJ that they've got nothing more to learn. I think a black belt is the one who's most willing to recognize, whoa, no, I've got as much to learn and more than I've come and what's behind me. Yeah. Right.
I think that's the utility in the study itself. And because I think on the surface you can look at it and you're like, look at these eggheads thinking they're going to solve all the mysteries in the world or figure all this crazy shit out. No, but I think, going through the exercise of studying it and recognizing, okay, man, good luck trying to control it and just predictably be able to, say, okay, this is going to create this outcome. I think that's the utility. It doesn't mean, like you said, well, we just give up because we can't understand anything. So
right.
Just go back.
And for me, Yeah, for me, the reason I find it interesting is because what really moves me towards wanting to understand is the idea of global security, right? Why is it that certain areas are so prone to violence? We want to pin it down on political differences. We might even want to pin it down on cultural differences, economic differences. But all of those factors exist in areas that don't have endemic violence. So there's more to it than that. And then the crises that spill out of those spill into other parts of the world. We look at Syria. We look at Venezuela. They had violent or political upheavals that all of a sudden they're pouring into the borders of other countries, which creates crises of different nature in those countries, right? Housing crisis, employment crises, even just schooling. Where do you put all these kids, right? And so you end up with the fact that when you look at something, it's not a siloed issue. And I've been watching people who would go down and deal with mudslides in Honduras and think that they could go in and clean up the problem and walk away, and it was done. But there's far more going on than just simply the mudslide. Why are those people living on that hill? Why is it that the houses are built the way that they are? Why is it that people are even living in that region, period? And what's preventing them from recovering on their own?
That's super interesting.
Going out there, right? You begin to have to incorporate other fields of study to continue to consider a real solution. And the reason I like it is because I've learned probably through very embarrassing anecdotal actions of my own that I'm really not as smart as I like to think I am. And I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm nowhere near as smart as I think I am. And other days I'm pretty dumb and I'm still not that smart.
Yeah.
And so for me, by studying this interdisciplinary degree that incorporates global governance, global security, emergency and crisis management, and complex systems theory altogether helps me be able to know who I need to surround myself with, not Englishing real well right now, surround myself with, to be able to create teams that will be most likely, not guaranteed, most likely to affect real and sustainable improvements in whatever the situation is that we're looking at. Crisis communications is a massive part of what I'm studying.
Yep.
Because I find that I've noticed in real life occurrences that what people believe is heavily dictated by the messages that they receive and how they perceive them.
Yes.
And
I'm gonna pause you just really quickly. And I have to say that was a hell of an introduction for us to get to, okay, now here's who this guy is. Here's why we need to listen to him on all this crisis stuff to make heads or tails of what is actually going on. But I think that was important, right? Because, just right off the street, like, hey, here's some guy that knows some stuff about some things. We're going to listen to him for an hour.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think it's kind of douchey, going back to the douchebaggery. I think it's really douchey of me to come in and try to present myself as some sort of an expert.
Sure.
Because fundamentally what I'm learning is that it's a dangerous place to be, particularly when you're dealing with these wicked, complex problems that we've got all around us in our personal lives and elsewhere. I mean, particularly within the last 2 years, to be in a room where you look around and realize that you're the smartest person in the room. That's a bad place to be. You don't want to be there for all smartest. That's a worse place to be. That's a worse place to be. But for me to walk into a room knowing how much I don't know, that saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? Knowing how much I don't know, to walk into a room and think I'm the smartest one there, I'm in trouble. And that whatever decisions coming out of that room are going to be is problematic as well. And so for me, I find it very interesting that it allows me to be able to recognize what elements need to be brought to the table in a solution finding practice, right?
One of the things that I really appreciate is the very, and again, knowing you personally, understanding that all of this is coming from a very altruistic place, right? Not just, hey man, I want to study some stuff so I can get this awesome kick-ass job and be smarter than everyone else in the world, or whatever. It's like, man, I think a lot of us as men today are looking around and we're like, things are not as awesome as we were probably hoping they would be by the year 2021. As I think when I was growing up as a kid, I thought things were probably going to be different.
I'm still waiting for my Jetsons jetpack.
I was literally going to say Jetsons.
Yeah, that's right.
We really dated ourselves here.
Yeah, we did.
So I think we look at the world like, man, we're kind of going in a direction that maybe isn't awesome. I don't know. I can't predict the future and I can't begin to understand the complexity of the system, but just testing the wind direction, it's like, kind of stinks. So what can we do? Right. And I think a lot of us ask those questions. And for me, I appreciate like, all right, well, here is a guy that is getting up off his ass and, surrounding himself with people and studying and trying to understand the things that actually could make some kind of a difference. Like I'm probably not going to sit in a room where I can influence and have conversations and make policy and do things like that with anyone else, at least not in the near future, right? You're sitting in those kind of rooms. You're actually doing that thing, which I think is helpful. My role is like, well, maybe I can at least get the information out in front of people. I can use my skill set and ability.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. In the sense that the part that of the positions that we hold.
Okay.
Community building is part of crisis management, emergency management, because crises are managed and crisis recoveries, disaster recovery is carried out by communities, not by some egghead Poindexter that shows up and has all the answers. If it's going to be done right, it's done by the community that is affected. But that community needs to be built. And that community needs to be self-motivated in a constructive direction. And what our society is dealing with right now is the opposite of that, which is precisely what you're saying. We are thinking that we can create policy that will fix the problem. Policy doesn't create self-motivated communities. It forces, obliges, even coerces people into doing something that might be contrary to their own better judgment, might not work in their particular community. The idea of broad sweeping solutions makes no sense. For example, I'm living in Canada right now. And I came here inadvertently and I'm here for this COVID thing. But one of the very first things that they were discussing here, we're going back to guns again, was gun control. There was an incident that happened in one of the eastern regions of Canada where there was a shooting, and immediately there was a sweeping, very authoritarian law. It was passed using a relic of the monarchy system from which Canada sprung. Isn't designed to pass law of that nature, but it was used to basically curtail a massive amount of firearms that are here in Canada. And it was primarily driven, like in the U.S., Canada is largely driven by the urban centers. The policies that are created are driven by urban centers, and so you end up with people in Toronto arguably happy. I mean, it's something to say. Is it a good idea for people to have open access to handguns and all sorts of stuff, all sorts of firearms in a tightly compacted city? There's an argument for saying maybe the policies in an urban center should be different than northern Quebec, where there isn't anybody for 1,000 miles and you have to fly wherever you go. Yet the people in Toronto decided, and Montreal decided, what gun control measures would look like in Chicoutimi, Quebec. Mm-hmm. Now, the reality in Chicoutimi is so very different that those laws make absolutely no sense from any way you look at it. But in Toronto, there might be some good justification for those specific laws. Now, I don't need to get into whether I agree with them or not. That's not a debate. The fact is that you're having distal communities making decisions, leading people to create policies that force other people into compliance with those policies that may make no sense where they are. And that's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, which comes back to your notion of communities, right? Where it's like, well, your community needs to be your immediate surroundings impacted by this thing, not the entire span of hundreds of, or thousands of miles in everyone.
Yeah.
Else. I mean, there's some universal stuff that I think we can all agree upon.
Yeah. So I think, I think going back to the thought that I had as you're talking about that you'll never occupy a place of making policy. I actually think you occupy people such as you occupy a more powerful position than somebody who can create a policy that obliges people to do something that may not make any sense to them. You end up, people who create policy face the probability, not the possibility, the probability of policy resistance, which we talked about earlier. Whereas somebody who is like you, who is a community builder, you are throwing ideas out there and allowing people to internalize those ideas, make them their own, and move in a direction that makes sense to them in their own particular context within the realms of their own bounded rationality. That is building people. Creating policy is forcing people.
Controlling. Yeah, you're controlling.
Is controlling people. And so in the modern stance of community building, of policy making, of global governance is this notion of granular governance, community-driven policies, behaviors, that sort of thing. And that is something that community builders such as yourself already seem to grasp. Academia and government is trying to catch up and figure it out. How do you get? And so who wields more power?
I don't know that they will, though. Because they're going, the academia and governance have found themselves, on the other end of the spectrum where they're wielding all the power. They're not going to relinquish that, even if it is, what is ostensibly or rather, if it's what is arguably the best thing for everyone, right? Because it's not in their own best interest. And again, it's really hard to escape our own bias. And it's like, well, yeah, I could take some of the food off of my table so that other people have it, but it's already sitting here and that's a lot of work and it smells really good. So I'm just going to leave it here and I'm sure they'll be okay. Maybe I can, when I'm done with it, I'll scrape the plate and they can take all the scraps and handle that. But human nature is, you're really going against the grain to think that the people in these positions are going to,
and they won't.
They're not, right? So then
they won't. It's like, sorry, you got a thought, and I want to hear that.
Yeah, well, there's two questions that I want to go into because I think you may have at least some answers, not all the answers. I hope maybe you do. It would be awesome if you did. But one of the things that I want to walk away with, not only for myself but for our listeners, is these tenets of crisis management, so that we can better manage crisis in our own lives, because we're going to see them, whether they're big or small or whatever. And I think as men, leaders of our household or our community or whatever, we find ourselves in a position of leadership. How do we communicate a crisis or through a crisis or what have you? And then this idea of community building, how can we tilt the scales back and bring things kind of to that sphere, as opposed to outsourcing everything all the time, which is what has gotten us to the place we're in right now. It's just like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. We'll just vote a guy and let him handle it. And I'm sure he'll keep my best interest in mind. He's not going to pad his bank account or trade some stocks to get ahead or make policies around that. Certainly not.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have any answers, but I certainly have some thoughts. I think the first thing that we were discussing it a little bit as far as community building and so forth is concerned. There's one. I'm going to say this though. It's negating something that I said earlier.
Okay.
That science is never a closed debate, right? Or is never settled. So I'm going to kind of negate this, but I'm going to leave a window open to say that there might be more to learn. But to the present, what seems to be a commonly agreed upon theme when it comes to crisis recovery is that most people would think that those who recover the quickest from a true disaster are those who have economic resources to pull from. That's why all of these different agencies, NGOs, church, religious organizations, different charitable organizations will often throw money, talk about how much money they've donated to a particular thing. And certainly that helps. I mean, if you've got a lot of money and you've got a lot of resources, you're going to be in a position where you're probably going to build your house quicker than other people, possibly. But what they've actually found through pretty extensive studies, the academic literature points to another factor that is actually far more a predictable determinant, measuring an individual or a community or even a society's ability to recover from a devastating event of whatever nature it might be. And that isn't economic capital; it's social capital. It's roughly, crudely explained, it's who you know and how far you can reach through those six levels of separation to Kevin Bacon type thing. Mm-hmm. It's the people who have spent and invested in the acquisition of that capital that recover immeasurably faster than people who are even wealthy relative to their surrounding counterparts. And so when preparing for crisis, which we all should be doing, because life is just one string of crises after another, for us to think that we're immune to that is incredibly either naive or not self-reflective. Because if every single person, if they take 5 minutes to self-reflect, to introspect, they're going to realize they have gone through some pretty heavy crises. And it's those things that when you recover from them, that make you into an interesting person, sure. Right? And also is the sort of thing that make you think, man, I pulled through that with the right mindset, right? And so as we go through our lives, we should be not paranoid in preparing for crisis, but we should just recognize that it's an inevitability. It's going to happen. At some point, we're going to lose our job. It's going to happen. Very, very seldom ever, let alone now, in the gig economy that we're all living in, should we really expect to be able to spend 25, 30, 35 years in the same job or even the same profession or trade, right? I started out as a professional athlete. Then I turned to the oil field as an oil field saturation diver. Then from there, I was a merchant mariner navigator. And from there, I was in tourism. And then from tourism, I was in foreign affairs and other things, and now I'm in major reconstruction and infrastructure development, right? And that's actually the correct term for it. It's not a douchey thing for me to throw the word major on front of it. It's okay. That's just what the term is, and which is very closely. All of this is involved with what I'm studying. And so if I look back in my life, I realize that most of those career changes didn't happen just because I woke up one morning and said, hey, I want to do this. It was because some form of crisis entered. I either realized that I wasn't suited for it, or I hated it, or the business closed or the economic conditions changed so that my business didn't work the way I wanted it to. And those are all crises that are heavy to go through for anybody who really is doing or trying to anyhow. And so when we're looking at life, we need to inherently accept the fact that crisis is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And understanding the principles of emergency and crisis management and disaster recovery is the primary tool that is proven to be, as far as we understand it so far, the number one factor that will determine how quickly you can recover from any crisis. And that is your social capital. We all spend a lot of time acquiring things. I know within this community, there's probably a fair amount of preppers. There's probably a fair amount of outdoorsmen who very much like myself. It's something that I enjoy doing is bushcraft, camping. What's the word?
Self-reliance, survival,
self-reliance, that sort of stuff. And we all will spend money in that in some way, shape, or form. Everybody does. Everybody tries to save money. Everybody, might go shopping once a week rather than every day, right? But very few of us, particularly men, unfortunately, spend much time building our social capital, reaching out and making connections with people who might not be of our same ilk. People who would bring different ideas and different resources to our table, who would increase our access to understanding the complexities of the systems around us through different eyes. And if we're able to do that as systematically as we prepare monetarily for the rainy day, we would find that we're substantially, just like these communities that are studied extensively in the academic literature, the ones that have a cultural investment in the social fabric of their communities, they're happier people. They're more diversified in what they're capable of doing, and they're immeasurably more resilient to the changes that life throws at them, their communities, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And I think as men, we're still living in this very admirable myth of the lone wolf, where I can take care of myself. Thank you very much. And that is respectable. And everybody should be in a position that they can do that. Yet realizing this is going to sound douchey to say, and I hope you and the listeners can take this with its intended meaning. When I went into this field of studies, I thought I knew more than I did. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I wasn't incorrect about going into it is that I am nowhere near as smart as I'd like to believe that I am, and therefore nowhere near as capable. Mm-hmm. And so I need to be surrounding myself with people who bring other chips to that poker table, right? Yeah. And so, but I need to be able to speak with them. I need to understand their field enough to recognize where they're carrying valuable assets that could be brought and how can they be incorporated in a way that really makes sense to them. And that managing crisis on a global scale, on a national scale, on a regional scale, on a community scale, on an individual home and person scale, it comes down to really your social capital. How many times, sorry.
No. I really like, and I wasn't expecting this to go this direction, but it just occurred to me, when you're talking about what you do in your profession, right? Where your job is to look at different people in their fields and their area of expertise, and then take whatever that scenario, the situation, the crisis is, and kind of pick the specific all-star team that is necessary to handle that, right? It's like, that's really cool, man.
I think it is.
What a noble effort, and like, what a really just super interesting concept. And then to take that on a large global scale, right? But it's the same process on our own personal scale, where it's like, okay, well, I can't pick and choose the world leaders and the leading people in this field and that field to come together and form my A team. But what I can do is look around my sphere, and maybe I need to extend beyond my immediate, stone throw distance to find people. But man, I can start selecting for some of the things that I may need and building the social capital that you're talking about. And I think that it's a really cool concept that I think is often overlooked. We kind of just fall into this, I don't want to say trap, but I think it's more so just a complacency thing where it's like, well, our friends are the people that are just kind of like, I don't know, Bob works at the cubicle next to me, so of course, he's my best bud, right? Because I moved away from my hometown and I don't hang out with any of the dudes I used to chill in high school with. And so I don't think we're taught how to actually build communities. You're not really taught how to make friends and meaningful relationships. And that's not saying that you got to put everyone through this weird tryout. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, man, you didn't, your 40 time wasn't fast enough. You can't be on my apocalypse squad, bro. You're not a good enough shot. But, man, we only get one life, man. We might as well spend it with people that man, enrich it in some way, not just necessarily out of convenience. And I think that's where a lot of people settle. They're like, well, man, my cousin, he's my cousin. I don't really like him that much, but we're related. So, and he just lives right down the street and he's got a couple buddies. So yeah, we just go and we drink beer on Saturday night and we're like, well, yeah, that might be okay, but maybe it is.
Yeah, I can't see anything wrong with that either. That sounds great. But I think what I see for the savage gentleman concept that you're laying out with the people that are your community that's contributing to the building of this community, because that's really what's happening. Is the notion that everybody likes to laugh. I like hanging out with people who I can just goof off with, right? But is that actually, well, it is. It is turning me into not the Dr. Douchebag that I can get into when I'm in my, stressed out. There's too much going on for me to manage. So, that state. And we've all got our versions of that, definitely. Mm-hmm. But the ones that challenge you in the way you're thinking, that force you to consider expanding the bounds of your rationality so you can make better decisions, right? And so you can understand, even if you want to talk about entertainment, right? Having fun, going out for a good laugh, going for a pint with the boys or whatever, right? Being able to include people that will bring different views, even if they're just entertaining views, for you to see this world in a different way. Because I talk to a lot of people right now. We've got about, on the particular project that I'm working with, we're directly responsible for about 1,000 people. I know that because of some of the COVID things that are going on, we're going to lose at least 150 of those because of the mandates that are being imposed upon them. And as much as I can try to control that impact, it's very much out of my hands. And so when I'm looking at, this 1,000 people that are there, when I talk with this, the ones that will talk about why, what is their motives and that sort of thing, I realize that there's, on both ends of that spectrum, there's an echo chamber that's occurring. And Don Lemon from CNN spoke it very well. He said, we're told that we're not supposed to shame these people. We're told that we can't call them dumb. I say we can, and we should, and they are. See, the problem with that sort of mentality is that you're denying somebody else's bounded rationality. And on the flip side of that coin, for someone who is contrary to the vaccine issue, mandates, whatever, for them to refer back to the other people and say, well, you're just a sheep, you just do whatever you're told, is again denying their bounded rationality. There's some real decision making that's going on both sides of that equation and all the gray areas in between. And for us to just back away and say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, prevents people from really learning and growing and building those bridges of understanding that will in fact be the ones that are going to get us through whatever this actually is, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what you believe it is, right? And
it's tough because, you know, we can look at people. It's so easy to see someone of the opposite belief or understanding, right? Wherever you are on the spectrum, and just be like, and just completely write them off. Like, well, you're hopeless. If you believe that Trump was the best president ever, you're hopeless. If you believe that Joe Biden is the greatest president that America has ever seen,
you're an idiot. Yeah.
Right. And maybe, and I don't know, maybe people who are on both ends of those spectrum, they actually are idiots. I don't know. I mean, maybe
could be.
Maybe
could
the
be.
only intelligent people are the ones that are somewhere in between and can recognize the pros and cons of both. I don't know. I guess time will tell, right? But it's super easy to just be like, well, I know what I believe, and I'm a pretty smart guy, and you're on the opposite end of that. So clearly, by default, you must be an idiot. It's
you must be stupid.
You must be stupid, right? That's the only logical explanation. But I think this idea of bounded rationality, for me, and I think I've spoken about this elsewhere or on I don't remember where I talked about it, but I got it from a friend of mine who his thesis is, well, people should just start the conversation with what they're afraid of. Tell me what you're afraid of, and then now I understand why I am terrified that this virus is going to kill me or a loved one. I am mortally afraid of dying. Oh, well, no wonder you're, the first in line to get this thing, right?
And on the flip side of that coin,
I am terrified of having all of my liberties stripped away from me and plunging
and never get them back
into a communist, regime. Oh, okay.
And
yeah,
and for a guy who's lived that, for people who have lived that, that's a terrifying concept.
Sure. I mean,
right?
It should strike fear.
On both, and I'm not referring to one side or the other, but someone who has lived severe illness, someone who has lived government tyranny, those two things are existential. They're existential crises that they do not want to relive, and they're things that people can relate to very easily. And so yeah, that's a fascinating thought. It's a fascinating way, because
it would save us a lot of time if you just, upon making an introduction, right, the first time meeting someone, you just tell them what you're super afraid of, and then it's like, oh, okay, well now.
Well, I told you, hey, we started well with this. I told you what I was concerned about.
Yeah, you
remember
being Dr. Douchebag.
Afraid of being Dr. Douchebag because, hey,
it can happen.
It can happen. People have those tendencies, and I'm aware that happens.
Yeah,
and so.
Well, so bringing this thing kind of hopefully full circle. I don't know if that'll ever happen. We could probably go on for 3 more hours. I don't know if anyone would be listening at that point, but I do want to give some things for folks to walk away with. I mean, there's so many really good nuggets in here, but so we've got a crisis, right? And we have people that are on opposite ends of the same crises. We're going through a crisis and people are interpreted in completely different ways, right? So how should, if we are, going to try and navigate through this, and we need to communicate through this crisis, because this is a big part of your study and in the scope of your work, what is the way that we need to be communicating throughout a crisis to actually net the best result? And I don't mean the best result for ourselves, which I think is what we're seeing right now by the people who are communicating the crisis. I don't think I have to go very far out on a limb here to say that the way this crisis has been communicated to the general public has been fairly self-serving to the people that are doing the communicating. I don't think that makes me super tinfoil hat. Some people might agree. Some people are like, no, this has been great. They have done everything that they can for my benefit. They are only here to help me personally and my family. They have my best interest. Maybe, like I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm jaded. Maybe there are those people who believe that. Maybe it's actually true. I don't know, but I don't buy it.
Yeah, I think you've got an interesting point there. I do. What's interesting is in any crisis, there's a bell curve. Like in just about everything, there's a bell curve. There's people who are very quick to happily do whatever their leaders, the people in power, whatever would say is the best solution for them. They're happy to do that. They recognize in time of crisis the decision-making capabilities of individuals, because of the stress and the different hormones that go along with that and chemicals that are running through a system, makes it very difficult for us to really contemplate very many moving factors at a given time. I mean, anybody who's in law enforcement or military will understand this better than most. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's been in a car accident understands this for those short moments. Everything slows down, but your scope of view and your ability to really think through things becomes so focused on what's happening that your ability to widen that view becomes difficult. So a lot of people, when they get in, that's right, can't process. So when people are in crisis, they go, I need somebody here to give me the solution because I know I can't find it. There's those people. Yep. On the other end of that spectrum, there's people that will say, no way, man, you get out of my business. You're full of crap. Everything that you say, you outsider, you government person, anything you say is garbage because I know I've had personal experiences with them that they screwed me over, what have you, right? Mm-hmm. And so the bulk of the people lie in the middle. When you're looking at managing a crisis from a larger crisis, now we can bring this down to a more granular level, to a family scope, your community or even yourself. It applies. The first thing that we need to understand is the way we communicate with each other either builds or destroys those ties of social capital that will determine how well we come out of this, right? Okay. And there's a number of principles that have excused the sensationalism, but it's fact. We're talking about crisis management. Crisis communication rules have, in essence, been written in blood. What works and what doesn't work. What doesn't work and what does work have been pretty solidly understood. Mm-hmm. And they get broken down in a few simple kind of little saying. One is the 3 C's. The 3 C's are what you must base all of your messaging on. And that doesn't just include what a government official says about a particular health crisis or political or economic crisis. It applies to the way we interact with people. When people are in stress, you must be concise, you must be consistent, and you must be compassionate. Hmm. Those are the 3 C's. And you going on concise, all of the scientific studies where they're putting electrodes on people and letting them listen to messages and watch images, and they're measuring their cortisol levels and their perspiration and their heartbeat and all that sort of stuff, shows that when we're in a normal position, we can handle quite a lot of information coming at us at once, and we can process a lot. We can process up to 9 to 11 bits of information at a given time. When we go into crisis, that number diminishes rapidly to a maximum of 3 bits of information, 3 individual concepts. Mm-hmm. But our attention span also is minimized substantially to about 9 seconds per byte of information. So there's a rule. It's called the 27-9-3 rule. Basically meaning when you communicate with somebody in crisis, be you a government person, be you a healthcare person, be you a crisis responder, a first responder, mm-hmm. It is essential that you use first those 3 C's to govern your next step. And your next step is finding a maximum of 3 items of information to relay to that person. And you cannot use any more than 9 seconds to deliver each item. And a total of 27 seconds is all you're going to get of that person's attention before they won't process anymore.
Hang on. That can't be right, because I'm pretty sure we have a 24-hour news stream that is constantly giving us all the information all the time. in as much detail as possible. And sometimes they're not really consistent because one day they'll say one thing and then the next day they'll say something different. And then maybe they come back. And so this whole 3C, this 27-9-3 rule can't be true because, I mean, no one is using it in the world today. So why?
It is extensively used. It is extensively used in the field of crisis management. Extensively. The problem is what we've got running this show are politicians who recognize that screen time, face time with their electors represents probable electability, right?
And electability for most circumstances equals income. And
equals income. That's right. It's their job. I mean, a politician has two jobs. One before they're elected and one after they're elected. The one before they're elected is to get elected. The one after they're elected is to ensure their reelectability, or at least very minimum, their party's reelectability. And so the focus of a politician is not action, because action implies accountability. A politician's role is to create favorable optics that lead towards reelectability. That's what their job is once they're elected. Now, so what's going on is that these rules of communication, which includes one more, there's lots, there's a few more, but I'm just going through the basic written in blood rules. The last one is never speak in absolutes. And this is a rule that we've seen absolutely violated. The conciseness. Obliterated.
Not even just COVID, in almost anything and everything. I mean, I don't know. I cannot think of a time where a politician or any talking head, for that matter, because I kind of put, a lot of the folks that are in positions of media and that sort of thing, in a pundits and that sort of thing, they only ever speak in absolutes. I can't think of a time where they're like, well, here's what we think, here's our best guess, this is and this is how we concluded that, but we're going to keep digging and hopefully find and make this a little bit more concrete. No, when they show up, when that camera gets turned on, the jury is out. We are done. It has been solved. And here it is. Take it and run with it.
There was, it's true. There's a really interesting study on that note that was done. I want to say it was at Berkeley, actually. And I don't need to get into who did it and why, but it's fascinating, the outcome. The outcome shows that if you are a public official, a person in power, and you make a promise, say, for example, here in Canada, the Prime Minister, which is the equivalent of the President here in Canada, made a promise to the Canadian people that by July 4th, every Canadian would have access to the vaccine if they wanted. Right? Now, great promise. The problem there is it was a promise. He was speaking in absolutes. Absolutely, by July 4th, you will have these vaccines. The problem lies in two elements there. One, he has no control over that. There's so many factors in this complex system of where these vaccines are coming from. Are supply chain issues going on, which is another discussion altogether. For him to be absolutely certain that every Canadian, it's 34 million people, could have a vaccine on July 4th.
It's a bold statement.
It's a bold statement. And maybe it's doable. But the study showed that the measurability of trust in somebody in that position, if they deliver on the 5th, is undermined as much as if they had delivered on August the 5th or July 4th the following year. There's no difference in the amount, the level of the public perception of the trust is undermined. And so they have to play a PR game of bolstering themselves back into the position that they lost. Instead of simply saying, speaking in correct crisis communication terms, and this applies to an individual, we are aiming and putting the best resources we have to get the vaccine ready for all Canadians by July 4th. It's a goal. It's not a fact.
Yeah.
If you get there on the 3rd, you're a hero. If you get there on the 5th, you haven't lost any credibility.
So that begs the question, then why would someone who is, conceivably of above average intelligence, why would they run that? Why would they take that risk and take that gamble? It just seems like a poor calculation to my feeble mind.
I think what it is, and this is my thought, it may be very well wrong, but what I think it is it's a reflection of the society in which we live in now, the selfie society, where this narcissistic tendency that drives the selfie society is putting our politicians in a position where they want to present themselves as the hero. Mm. And so it's driving them to not do what you would hope a person approaching the process of resolving a crisis would do. And that is assuming that they have the answers, that they can push their power to make things happen the way they think they should. Instead, deferring to people who know more about the situation than they do, and allowing those people to take the stage. The selfie culture that we live in would make it very difficult, I think, these are my thoughts, would make it very difficult for a public figure, a politician who got themselves there as a public figure, to take that back seat and say, you know what?
Share the spotlight with
this person knows more. And this is the reason why we have the celebrity of the Fauci's, of the Trumps, of the Obama. These people are as much celebrities as they are public leaders.
Sure.
And I'm not saying anything negative or positive about them or their policies. I'm just saying that there is a tendency for this culture to want to see that individual, that face, be the solution maker. When they do not have the training, they do not have the expertise to really make those statements, and don't want to lose the initial face of walking up and saying, look, guys, we don't know what's going on.
Guys,
we know there's an issue.
Sorry. I don't know what's going on, but it's really bad. Look, there's some stuff that went down in China. No one knows what it is, but we're going to figure it out. So just, maybe stay inside for a couple of days while we figure it out. And as soon as we get it, sorted, we'll let you know and go from there.
And that's the thing, is concise, consistent, and compassionate, right? Never speaking in absolutes, and using the 27-3-9 rule. If you just use those rules in your communications at times of crisis and can incorporate them in how you deal with people, you put yourself in a position where, as a global leader, you say exactly what you said. It says, look, we don't know what this is. And that's okay. We've got some smart people here. This is this guy here, and he's working in this area. And this is this guy here, and he's working in this area. And this is their team, and they're working to understand what's going on. And the science is going to evolve because we don't understand it yet. But as it evolves, I hope that you, my people, my electors, my whatever, will understand that we will communicate concisely and consistently and compassionately. We will not make absolutes. We will not make absolute statements. And we're going to keep things short so we don't bombard you with so much information that you get confused. And when you get confused, you get scared because you don't know the decision to make. And when people get scared, they either go into that sheep mode, give me the solution, or they go into the antagonistic, resistant mode, right, where people are pushed from that bell part of the curve to the outer limits of it.
Yeah, you're basically pushed off that cliff at the top of the bell curve and dropped down into the valley, and now you're stuck on this one side or the other. And I think that is, unfortunately, those are the voices that we're hearing that are the loudest. I think that the two extremes of the bell curve on the, however you want to define it, the positive or negative, the left or the right or whatever, those are the people that are shouting the loudest. And I'd like to believe that the bulk of the individuals are somewhere in the middle and are a little bit more rational about things. That's my, I don't know, my sheer optimism. But looking at pretty much any system, any statistics, that is generally the distribution. I mean, if you have a large enough population and enough data points, you are almost always going to end up with some sort of a bell curve to that. And so I don't want to say that it has to be true, but I've got a pretty strong inkling. And so for those of us who are in the middle, I think one thing that is very useful is what you illuminated with this crisis process and understanding. It's like, well, if someone isn't communicating in that way, if we know these are the basic tenets, right? You've got the 3 C's: be concise, be consistent, and be compassionate. Okay. Well, if I'm running down my checklist, if I'm, I've turned the TV on or I'm listening to someone and I'm like, X, well, you failed that test. Okay. And then we go into the 27-9-3 rule of how concise it actually needs to be.
And you're listening to a 2-hour-long diatribe, right?
Right. Then, okay, well, that's problematic as well. I think it's important that we recognize that. And then our next question needs to be, okay, well, what are the motives? Why are these people deviating from the plan? Is it nefarious? Is there fuckery afoot? Are they out to get me? I don't know. Maybe
I'd like to interject something. There's always fuckery afoot. There's always fuckery afoot.
Fair enough.
The question is what kind of fuckery is afoot? There's definitely career building. There's career building. There's deals going on. We know this. This is not a surprise. It shouldn't be to anybody that backroom deals are being made all the time. So there is fuckery afoot.
No way. Stop.
Yeah, it's true. That's that. People... I think I've just turned in from Dr. Douchebag into Captain Obvious. Did I just do that to you?
You might have. I don't know if that's a promotion or a demotion. Yeah, I mean,
I think it's definitely a promotion. Definitely a promotion.
No, I mean, people are going to use their position to get some kind of personal gain, and depending on the morality of said person, that will determine how much they're willing to throw someone else under the bus in order to get that. And some people not so much. But I mean, I'm going to do stuff that's going to help me out for sure. Right? There's a line that I cross that, okay, man, that's kind of dirty. I'm not going to do that to this person because I have some sense of peace.
And I think to some degree what I've witnessed is that everybody does have their price. Everybody does. Fortunately, most of us never meet that price.
Right.
And so we're able to go through life with those lines in the sand. We should have lines in the sand drawn, there should be boundaries that we will not cross. But yeah, I think I think it's absolutely certain that there is fuckery going on, but I don't think it's necessarily unique. There might be a unique type of fuckery going on right now, but it's not unique to this particular period in history.
No.
I mean, you look at
by any means. You look
at Nixon. You look at Nixon. You look at Clinton. You look at like all of these leaders within U.S. history happen to get caught in different flavors of fuckery, and so
well, you can go back through since we started writing things down. I mean, this is not even unique to, the US. It's not unique to the 21st century. This is human nature, right? And so to just think that like, well, I don't know, man, that Fauci guy, there's no way he could have, you know what I mean? And I'm picking on him because he's easy to pick on. But you could pick literally.
Yeah, he's a clear target right out in the open. Easy to get at.
I mean, here's my litmus test, right? If I look at someone and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'd let that person babysit my kids. That's my trust.
That circle gets pretty small pretty quick.
It's like, so when I'm looking at people that I can trust and I turn on the TV and I'm watching this particular person talk and I'm like, I don't know how I feel. And maybe that's not a great litmus test. Maybe there's people that I wouldn't trust with my kids, but they're excellent at whatever it is they need to be doing, and they're useful in that thing. But that's kind of my thing. I was like, hey man, I'm not leaving my kid alone in a room with you. Sorry.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of that. My wife sends me these pictures of this Photoshop artist. He's a graphic artist. And every time his wife asks him where the kids are, he like Photoshops them into some stupid, like, hanging off of a balcony 50. Yeah, like something like that, right? They're fine. That sort of thing.
It's fantastic.
But sorry, I digress. But
no.
But I think, the one thing that's most important for people to understand is that there is no consistency. There is no conciseness, and there is no compassion in the communication. I was shocked when the equivalent of a Canadian, the Canadian equivalent of a governor in the province of Ontario, which is where the capital city is, as well as Toronto. He was talking about the last lockdowns that occurred, stay-at-home orders, not just lockdowns, that occurred. I want to say it was in July and August. I think it was in July and August. And he, as he was leading up to them, he was messaging, and he said, I've done it before. I'll do it again. I'm not taking anything off the table. Don't push me.
Pretty good.
And I thought, wow, you're about to force people to stay in their homes and not be allowed to go out for anything other than grocery shopping, or to go to work if they go to an essential, if they're classified as essential. The utter lack of compassion that was there put me, the type of person I am, my go-to state is to fight. That's my go-to state. I have to reel that back in a lot. Like, just when I was backing my boat in, there was some kid standing on the street looking at me, shaking my head. Now, I wasn't doing the greatest job of backing the thing up, but it wasn't that bad a job, and it wasn't affecting him at all. And so my go-to was, you got a problem. Like, what's going on? Right? And I realized, that was unnecessary. So I backed away and I said, look, man, I'm sorry if it sounded a little bit abrupt. I'm just curious. You're watching me do this as if there's something that is bothering you. If there's something going on out here, let me know so I can change what I'm doing. Right. But my go-to was, smart ass little shit. That's my go-to.
Yep.
And so when I hear somebody pushing, when I hear somebody being a smart ass, when I hear somebody disrespecting, that's my go-to. Mm-hmm. So back to, crisis management. For an individual to recognize what these communication rules are and when they're being violated, you need to understand. Like, I had a conversation with a young lady at work today. Unfortunately, it wasn't that kind of a conversation that mind you, I'm married, so that probably wouldn't have been a good outcome anyway. It would have been a bad
crisis.
Yeah, it would have been a crisis. But I was having a conversation with this young lady who had decided she was going to get vaccinated. And I have no control over what HR does with those who are non-vaccinated and so forth. But I certainly have an opportunity to speak with them because, for the most part, they'll talk to me. And I was, from an academic perspective, I was very curious why this young girl who had, fresh out of school, got a really good job. She was extremely excited to be there, and it was a meaningful position. And you could tell she loved it, why she was at the point of walking away from that job and why she changed. And what was interesting is it was a conversation that happened, and I'm not going to condone nor denigrate her decision. I don't know fully whether she felt forced to do it or what. I can't say that for sure. But what was interesting is I wanted to understand why it was that she was the only person in her circle of friends and family that had chosen not to get vaccinated and had ridden right up to the line of losing her job, right? And here in Canada, it's not you get fired. It's not you get laid off. You get no unemployment benefits. You get no severance pay. You are put on what's called an administrative leave, which means you're basically just let go. You can't. In a lot of places, you can't claim your holiday or your banked holidays or your sick leave pay, that sort of stuff. It's really quite mean-hearted, really, if you ask me, right? But that's what's going on, and so we were talking about it, and she said, I just I just couldn't trust what I was being told. And I said, well, why is it that you couldn't trust what you're being told? She said, well, one day they'd come out and they'd say this. And then the next day they'd come out and they'd say the exact opposite thing. And both times they would say that this is the decided science. The science is settled and this is with absolute certainty. And she goes, if they're absolutely certain the first time and then they turn and flip the coin the next day, why should I trust them the third time when they're telling me that I must get the vaccine or I'm a risk to society? They've lied to me all the way along and flipped their coin. How do I know that I'm going to get the vaccine and it's safe? And then tomorrow they're going to tell me, well, as a matter of fact, it's not. Tough for you. Oops. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. And her, like me, when she knows that there's fuckery about and that it affects her directly, the first thing she does is dig her heels in. Mm-hmm. It's some people are wired that way. I happen to be one of those people. For better or for worse. Sometimes it's good for better and sometimes it's for worse.
Truthful. I mean, I think for the sake of humanity, it is good that we have those people. And not to say that everyone who digs their heels in is always right or righteous and that every situation should be met with that. But imagine a world where no one ever bucked the system for any reason whatsoever.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
a society where, hey, this is what some people came up with. Take it, deal with it, bend over, enjoy.
Well, all of the greatest changers in history have been rebels. They've been outcasts. They have been, in a lot of cases, would have been classified as criminals, mm-hmm. right? Even in our days, they would have been classified as criminals, maybe more so. What I'm getting at, though, is that if you recognize that your go-to place is to dig your heels in, or on the other hand, if you recognize that your go-to place when things start getting tense is to look for somebody else to solve the problems, and you can recognize that, and you start hearing these communications that are coming in are confusing you, so causing you to flip one way or the other, and you recognize that it's there, you can separate yourself from that. I dig my heels in and I get stubborn, even if I'm wrong. My wife will tell me that all the time. And most of the time she's right. Not all the time, but most of the time she's right. She's a very non-conflictive person. I have no problems with conflict. I don't look for it usually, but I don't have problems with it. And so if I recognize that my tendency is to dig my heels in when I think there's fuckery about, I need to consciously say, okay, we'll use that millennial term, I'm being triggered here to go into a space that is narrowing my options. My options went from I can do whatever I want. I can comply, I can semi-comply, or I can fight it and lose my job and my house and all this sort of stuff. If I back away from it, I can start looking at a greater range of options mm-hmm. for what I can do. The same for the person who wants to have the decisions made. That's no more healthy than me digging my heels in and being, I've had to make a lot of pivots to be able to work through this crisis, as all of us have, right? Sure. And if I simply said, I am resisting, I am taking my family and we're going up in the northern woods and we're going to build a cabin and fuck everybody, mm-hmm. well, I might have some kids that are a little unhappy right now. I'd certainly have a wife that's unhappy right now.
You might run into some much bigger problems as well.
And I might not be really as good a woodsman as I'd like to think I am.
For sure. Well, going back to what you said, I'll borrow a tagline from a buddy of mine. I don't know if you know Ryan Mickler of Order of Band, but he's
I don't know him personally, but I know who he is. Yeah.
I don't know if this is his original statement. Or if he got it from somewhere else, but it's where I heard it. But he talks about this idea of either being reactive or responding, and there's a difference, right? And so your action
absolutely
might be to dig your heels, right? And maybe that is the right thing, but if you can pull back just a little bit and look at, you can actually instead respond, which I think insinuates a little bit more.
That's far better. That's far better communicated than what I was trying to say. Okay. That is what I was trying to say, but far more eloquent in saying it.
Well, I wish I was the one that came up with it, but I'm getting.
Well, we'll say that it was you, and he stole it from you. How does that sound? That's right. That's right. Yes, stick it to him. But that's it. And that's the thing, right? Is that if you look at yourself and realize, whoa, I'm going into default mode here. I'm reacting, and by understanding why it is that you don't trust this guy that's talking to you, that's delivering a message. Why don't I trust him? Well, there's some psychologically proven, written in blood, crisis communication rules that they're violating. They're so badly, it's like they're doing it intentionally. Of course, I don't trust them.
Right. Does
that mean that they're not trustworthy? Maybe. It could very well mean that. But if I immediately go to my default of either being compliant or being defiant,
yes,
then I'm not responding. I'm reacting. Mm-hmm. And in order to negotiate crisis on a personal or a larger scale, we need to be responding.
Yeah,
not reacting.
I think that's 100%. And for me personally, I look at this thing and I still hold some space where it's like, all right, I have my beliefs, I have my feelings on this thing, but I could be wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't absolutely look, I'm not, I'll say I'm not a fan of the mask mandates. I'm not a fan of any mandates. Do whatever the hell you want to, but don't mandate shit to me.
Right.
Is kind of my general stance. That being said, there is the possibility where this vaccine thing could be the savior of mankind. I don't think so. I don't believe that deep down, but man, I'm not God and I don't know what the future would look like. So it is possible, but so far what I have seen up until this point leads me to a certain set of beliefs, and those beliefs are going to color my response to how things are going. And my thing is my hope is not that everyone thinks and believes exactly like I do and they make the same decision that I make. But
that's an easy place to be, but it's pretty dang boring, really.
Yeah, to just, all right, guys, I made the decision. You guys do that too, because I know everyone's circumstance is going to be different. My thing and what I would like, people listening and everyone else is just to go through the process, kind of look at what you said. Is your reaction typically fight or flight? And if so, recognize that. Are you doing that in the situation? Take a step back and now start looking at the why before you actually respond. Okay, why did I do this way? And is this actually the appropriate response? It may be, but it could also not be. So taking that second to, to show some self-awareness and some critical thinking around what's happening, as opposed to just, nope, man, this guy's got he's got a blue check mark next to his name, so fuck him and whatever. Yes, or he's right. He comes,
or he's got a red,
one. So this guy's an idiot.
Or he speaks with a Southern accent, or he speaks with a New York City accent. I mean, it's totally. It's the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to,
or he speaks with a really fucked up Canadian / Latin American accent.
Yeah,
and we can't really tell what the fuck he is, right?
I have no idea. This guy. I don't know. It's hard to trust Canadians, man.
Well, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, totally shifty. That's right. You ever see the movie Canadian Bacon?
I don't think so.
No. With Candy and what's his name?
John Candy movie. That's
John Candy. Yeah, it's an old one. We're talking 80s, but it's actually hysterical because they're all Canadian actors, the leads in them, and they're totally taking the piss out of Canadian culture. It's hysterical. They're running through the crowds under the CN Tower in Toronto, convinced that they're in the capital city and that the CN Tower is like kind of the hub of what's going on.
Yeah.
And these Canadians are apologizing as they're like crushing to the ground and breaking their bones. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
About right. Yeah.
And it's terrible people.
I will say you guys have you do have a good sense of humor about that. You take it on the chin pretty well. Sometimes.
Well, it's interesting. I was born in Canada. I spent most of my life outside of Canada. Mm-hmm. So I kind of come here as much of an outsider as I am. I carry a Canadian passport, Most people would look at me and assume that I'm just some, Euro Canadian,
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's fine, but it's very interesting to be in my position to kind of observe from a little bit of a distance and be able to see the culture as it is. I've got very close ties to the U.S. as well. I've got family that has lived there forever. My dad is American, and so I like to think it's a unique perspective on the whole thing. And Canadians are funny people to laugh at and laugh with, and they'll do both at the same time. And I think that's healthy. I think there's some definite flaws in the society as well, but I think that can be said pretty solidly for everywhere.
Yeah, pick a number. I mean,
close
your eyes and put your finger on the map, and you'll find flaws. That's human nature. But one thing I really do appreciate about you, Ryan, is your unique perspective on a lot of things. I mean, you bring, a lot of really cool insight that I think I'm not always privy to. So I'm really, glad that I have someone like you that's kind of traveling in these circles and giving these experiences and these perspectives, because I find it really helpful and fascinating. And I'm hoping that the folks that have been hanging out with us today have gotten there as well. And if not, well, sorry. It
was fun. I had fun.
We had fun.
I had fun. Yeah. The one thing I enjoy talking all the time, every time you and I have an interchange, whether it's by phone or what have you in person, I find that I kind of come away from it. I think that it's really that whole social, that whole social capital thing. You're a different man than I am. You have a different view on things. You have different strengths that you're bringing to the conversation and different concepts that every time I walk away, like that whole idea of respond versus react. Very simple concept, but in 3 words, you summarize something that I was trying to get out. And that's the value of these social networks that you can build around yourself. And it's not just networks. It's not like Facebook, how many people you know. It's the amount that those people are willing to invest in you because you've invested in them.
Yeah.
That's social capital. And social capital only comes from a real interchange of ideas and respecting the fact that, dude, you're different than me. That's good. You should be. Mm-hmm. And as you're different, you're going to bring different concepts, different ways of looking at things. Even if I don't agree with them, I've still seen a different angle, seen something through a different lens that I've never considered before, that widens my ability to make better decisions with the resources that I've got.
Yeah.
Right.
So, man, I think the 2 biggest takeaways and
so like, for one, I'm missing my beard right now, man.
That is
big time.
I'm missing your beard too. For the people
I know.
that are watching, it came as a surprise to me, because the last time I saw you, you were very bearded, very much bearded.
Yeah.
I think your head was shaved, but you had
probably
you had a pretty substantial going on, man. It was nice. But apparently, duty calls.
Even now, it's been a good year since I've had to have it off. And even now, when I put
you're just wait. Yeah, you're like, oh.
I expect to find something here, and it's still kind of, you look at the jaw, like, where'd it go?
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh man, I don't know. I can't imagine looking at myself without a beard for as long as I've had this one. It would be. My kids have never seen me without a beard. Neither.
Yeah, you'd freak them out real good if you took that off.
Man, I can't.
My youngest wouldn't hug me for she was like 2. She wouldn't even go near me. She was terrified of me. It was great. It was great. I'm sure she's going to be speaking to a therapist about some deep, dark abandonment issue that she'll have to go into hypnotherapy about to figure out what. Yeah, guaranteed. That's our job. So to screw them up. So they can spend the next 40 years of their life straightening themselves out, right?
I mean, it's hard we got to create some crisis for them, right? Like,
right. Life isn't good without crisis, man.
Yeah.
Life isn't good without crisis.
How are you going to grow without some kind of crisis? So
yeah,
I think for folks, who've stuck it out this long, because we've been on this thing for a while. This is a good one. But I think the basic tenets of crisis management is really, understanding that not only for yourself, but for disseminating information, and when a crisis is being communicated to you, I think that looking for those things are some important keystones. And when there's a lack of those, it should probably raise a few red flags.
Yeah, well, I also think there's one thing that I alluded to, but didn't really get into the meat of, and it'll only just take a second, because I think that I'd love to continue the conversation, but I think we should wrap it up. The issue is that when we're talking about social capital, right? These investments that you've made in other people and the investments that they've made in you, they can be severed very quickly when people are under strain. And so in those moments of strain, when you're communicating with those people that are part of your social capital, to integrate those rules of crisis communication will prevent you from alienating certain people that would otherwise be valuable people to have within your circles, and or making people who would otherwise be useful to you expect you to solve their problems too.
No, that's really good, because that is the time when you need that social capital the most. So, it's imperative, it would seem, to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to keep those bonds connected, and not sever them. So,
and the quickest way to destroy them is forget those three principles. If you start making absolute promises, speaking in absolutes, just to recap, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, just to recap what those are for the people listening.
Yeah, the three C's. The three C's of crisis communication are: speak concisely, consistently, and with compassion. And tied to those, the conciseness is use the 27-9-3 rule. And that is that you have 27 seconds of their time, and at most you can relay 3 bits of information, 3 ideas, which means that you have about 9 seconds per. And then when it comes to consistency, never speak in absolutes. Don't ever say we will do this. Say we're going to work towards doing this. Looks like we could be able to do it, and this is our goal. And this is what we think, and this is where we think we're going. But once you start speaking in absolutes, the trust and the confidence that the people around you have in you is diminished when you can't deliver precisely, exactly in the scenario that you laid out to them. And the problem with that is the outcome is never what you think it is.
Right.
And some people will look at it and think this,
complex systems, right?
Exactly.
Like you said before, what we know of complex system is, man, it's never that simple. The lever may not do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah, and even if you do deliver what you think you set out to deliver, somebody who might be a vital component of your social capital might not interpret that as a completed promise. And so by speaking in absolutes, you set yourself up for failure. By speaking in long-worded things, kind of like I tend to do, in long-winded things, violating that 27-9-3 rule, you will lose people. You'll flood them, and they will either go into their dig their heels in, or you need to solve my problems route.
Yeah.
And then always compassion. People are suffering just as much. People are stressed out just as much as you are, and sometimes more, depending on the headset that you have. And that, though those rules apply and have been clearly disregarded throughout this globally, there is no nation that I have seen in my studies that have abided by those rules.
I don't
even
think
closely.
A single one. No.
Not even remotely. And because of that, there is a massive amount of distrust, and there's a massive amount of absolute compliance, which is those two ends of that bell curve.
Pretty well.
Not a good place to be. Yeah. It's not a good place to be, but it is where it is, and you don't want to create that same bifurcation of those people that are part of your social capital in the time of crisis, whatever it might be. Like losing a job, or having a relationship breakdown, or getting in a car accident, or what have you. Yeah. And so yeah. No, but
man, I think that's fantastic. I mean, we definitely violated those rules all to smithereens.
Yeah, it was great, huh?
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah.
But we're not communicating.
Right now.
We're not in crisis. I don't feel in crisis. I've been having a great time. So
fantastic.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, we'd be in bad shape if this was a crisis. We're talking about. But
2 hours. Yeah,
2 hours.
I don't. You don't do the social media thing, so there's not really. Do you have anything to plug if people want to connect with you or check out what you're doing? I'd love to, send people to you if that's something you would like. I feel like you're kind of flying under the radar, though. So.
I have to be flying under the radar right now, and even this, we had some significant conversation before this about how we need to keep this under a radar. There's a lot of sensitivities in the organizations I'm working with.
Yeah, there's some things that, man, depending on what you say and how you say it, could have some serious repercussions nowadays.
Right.
I think that the savage gentleman needs to be aware of their position and their situation. And look, some people can say whatever they want whenever they want, and that's perfectly fine. And we need those savages out there. Some people need to be a little bit more tactful for the grand scheme of things. And I think, that a bit of strategery can go a long way. I don't see that as being like, oh man, you guys just tiptoed around the issues like a bunch of.
Yeah, it's different. It's different tiptoeing around the issues versus respecting different agreements that proprietary agreements and that sort of thing. That not to mention security issues and that sort of thing. So to broadcast what organizations I'm working with and so forth, I think it's unnecessary to get into my political views or in this particular, because I have them. I clearly do.
Yeah.
And you and I have had discussions about what they are, but I don't think it's necessary that we get into them now. I will continue to fly under the radar for probably the next little while. I'll pop up. I'd love to pop up again with Savage Gentlemen. You guys are great to talk to. Every time I come away, I feel like I've come away with something that I hadn't considered before, and that's always it's always a worthwhile conversation. Your audience has always been a cool audience to engage with. When I was working with you guys as a moderator on your Facebook page, I enjoyed that quite a lot. Yeah, in the league, yeah. And but I will be emerging in the not too distant future with a few projects that I think might be of value to the savage gentleman out there, and certainly I'd like to think that they might be of interest, if not of value as well. And so we can talk about that later. But right now, I just wanted to have the opportunity to chat with you about this time of crisis that people are going through, whether whatever the nature it might be. I don't know if my words have been of any assistance to anybody, but it's certainly the sort of thing that I think a lot of people are wondering why there's so much inconsistency, and why it is that there's so much distrust. And if I've been able to bring any clarity, as much as there is ability to find clarity in it, which is kind of a funny scenario, but if that's it's great. That's all I was hoping to pull away from this.
Yeah, I think you absolutely did. I mean, you definitely did for me, and I think a lot of people will find this useful. And when you're ready to come back out into the light and get a breath of air, or I guess maybe swim a little bit further downstream is probably maybe a better analogy. If you're ready to get,
it'll be a rest. I'll tell you. Wow, it'll be a rest.
Ready to get back in the shit water with the rest of us, you're always welcome. Back into the league. You can get
looking forward to that day. I'll tell you, I am looking forward to that day.
Awesome. And, well, Ryan, really appreciate it, buddy. I know we'll be talking again soon. So, man, take care. And until then, man, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, man. Stay savage. See you later.